Rain lashed the kitchen window, a relentless gray drumming against the glass. October 7th, 4:23 p.m. The kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones and settles heavy in the spaces loneliness carves out inside you. Sarah traced a finger through the condensation, blurring the view of her tiny, rain-slicked backyard in Millville. A town she still didn't know, a house that still didn't feel like home. 6 months since the move, 6 months since leaving everything familiar, everything safe behind. For Chloe, always for Chloe. Her 4-year-old daughter sat at the worn linoleum table, intently stacking colorful blocks, her small face a picture of fierce concentration. The only sound, besides the rain, was the soft clack, clack, as each block found its precarious place. Sarah watched her, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. Was this right? Uprooting them, leaving the support of friends, the comfort of the known, for a cheaper rent, a fresh start that felt more like drifting? Chloe hadn't asked for this quiet, this isolation. Sarah's gaze drifted back to the window, to the skeletal branches of the maple tree thrashing in the wind. Did I make a terrible mistake? A soft movement? A shift in the periphery? Tara, the tabby cat Sarah had found, or rather, who had found them, huddled, shivering and impossibly thin, under their porch steps just a week after they'd moved in. She hadn't meant to keep her, just feed her, maybe find her owner. But no collar, no response to flyers. And Tara, she hadn't tried to leave, not once. Now, she sat perfectly still on the old armchair by the radiator, a patchwork of browns and grays, amber eyes fixed, unblinking, on Chloe. Not on the blocks, but on Chloe herself. It was a stillness that wasn't sleep, wasn't relaxation. It was watchfulness, an alertness that seemed too deep, too focused for an ordinary house cat. Sarah had noticed it before, the way Tara would always position herself between Chloe and any open door, the way her ears would flick towards the child's slightest whimper. Even in sleep, there was a faint scar, a thin white line bisecting the fur above her left eye, a silent history Sarah knew nothing about. And those eyes, sometimes, held an unnerving depth. Old eyes, CTA start. You're here listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. CTA end. Sarah sighed, the sound swallowed by the rain's monotony. She turned back to the sink, filling the kettle. Tea. Something warm to hold on to. The move had been about survival, scraping together enough after the divorce, finding a place where the rent didn't feel like a suffocating weight, but survival felt cold and lonely. Millville was friendly enough, in a distant small-town way, but Sarah was an outsider, a single mother with shadows under her eyes and a past she kept folded small, tucked away. She missed the easy laughter of her old friends, the shared babysitting, the feeling of being held. Here, it was just her, Chloe, and the quiet Tabby with the watchful eyes. Chloe giggled, a sudden, bright sound that sliced through the gray. Her tower of blocks had toppled. "Mommy, look! Crash!" Sarah managed a smile, turning. A big crash, sweet pea. Tara hadn't flinched at the noise. Her gaze remained locked on Chloe, her body relaxed but utterly present. It was strange, comforting, and slightly unnerving. This cat, this quiet survivor, seemed to have appointed herself Chloe's silent guardian. Sarah poured the hot water over the tea bag, watching the amber swirl bloom in the cup. Tara had saved them, in a small way, already. That first night, when Chloe had woken screaming from a nightmare, disoriented in the unfamiliar dark, Tara had been there first. Sarah had found the cat pressed against Chloe's side, a low, rumbling purr vibrating through the little girl's trembling body, a sound deeper and more resonant than Sarah had ever heard from her before. Chloe had calmed, her sobs subsiding into hiccups, her small hand buried in Tara's thick fur. It was the first time Sarah hadn't felt utterly alone, in the dark, with her frightened child. But now, watching Tara's unwavering focus, Sarah felt a different kind of chill, unrelated to the rain. It was the chill of premonition, faint but undeniable. A sense that this watchfulness, this fierce, silent protectiveness radiating from the small creature on the chair, wasn't just about comfort. It felt like preparation, like Tara, scarred and streetwise, knew something Sarah didn't. Knew that the gray October rain and the quiet isolation of their little house wasn't the whole story. That danger, when it came, wouldn't knock. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug, seeking its comfort. She looked at her daughter, lost in her simple block world, utterly trusting. She looked at Tara, the sentinel, and deep down, beneath the fatigue and the loneliness, a tiny, unfamiliar ember flickered. Not quite hope, not yet, but the quiet, trembling sense that something profoundly important, something that would change everything, had already begun. It had begun the moment a rain-soaked Tabby chose their porch and chose Chloe. A shift, quiet as a cat's footfall, deep within Sarah's weary heart. She didn't know it then, not really, but that scar above Tara's eye and the depth in her amber gaze held the key to a moment of blinding terror and impossible courage that would soon shatter their rainy afternoon forever. A moment where claws and fur and a mother's scream would collide, and a quiet Tabby would become a legend. The rain, eventually, stopped. Not with a dramatic flourish, but with a weary sigh. The relentless drumming softened to a patter, then drips, then an unsettling quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the world was left glistening, cold, and strangely exposed. Millville seemed to hold its breath in the damp aftermath. Inside, the radiator hissed, a comforting counterpoint to the lingering chill in the air. Sarah wiped down the table, the scent of pine cleaner sharp and artificial, chasing away the ghost of spilled milk from Chloe's breakfast. Tara, the patchwork Tabby, had moved, not far. From the armchair, she'd migrated to a patch of weak sunlight struggling through the now clearing clouds, falling directly onto the worn rug near Chloe's feet. Chloe, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, was now deeply engrossed in a picture book, her small finger tracing the lines of a bright red fire truck. Her lips moved silently, shaping words only she could hear. Tara watched, always watching. But now, Sarah noticed, it wasn't just observation, it was attunement. Tara's ears, those delicate radar dishes, swiveled minutely with every tiny sound Chloe made. A page turn, a soft hum, a shifting of her little body on the floor. The cat's tail, thick and banded, lay still, but the very tip flickered. Just once, when Chloe pointed excitedly at the page and declared, "Big truck, Mommy." Sarah leaned against the counter, mug of now tepid tea forgotten. She watched them, the child lost in vibrant, imagined worlds. The cat, grounded in the absolute reality of this child, in this room. It was a connection Sarah felt both deeply grateful for and strangely outside of. Tara's bond was with Chloe. Sarah was the provider of food, the opener of doors, the source of warm laps on cold evenings. But the intensity, the silent communion, was reserved for the little girl. It had started small, these threads of trust weaving between them all. The first time Tara hadn't bolted when Sarah approached with the food bowl, but had instead sat, waiting, her amber eyes fixed not on the food, but on Sarah's face. The first time Chloe, in a burst of toddler enthusiasm, had tried to scoop Tara up for a hug. Sarah had held her breath, expecting a hiss, a scratch, a frightened retreat. Instead, Tara had gone utterly still, allowing the clumsy embrace for precisely 3 seconds, before gently, very gently, extracting herself with a soft murp and retreating to a respectful distance. Not rejection, just boundary setting. Chloe had learned. "Gentle Tara," she'd say now, holding out a tentative hand for the cat to sniff before stroking her back with feather-light touches. If this gentle story brought even a tiny smile or calm to your heart, would you consider subscribing? It helps me keep sharing these soft moments, for you and for anyone who needs peace tonight. Sarah's own connection with Tara was quieter, slower. It lived in the shared silence of late evenings. After Chloe was asleep, Sarah would curl up on the sofa, the weight of the day, the weight of everything, pressing down. Tara would often appear, a silent shadow, and leap up not onto Sarah's lap, but onto the cushion beside her. Close, but not touching. She'd settle, tucking her paws neatly beneath her, and simply be there. Her presence was a solid warmth in the dimly lit room. Sarah found herself talking, sometimes, not to Tara exactly, just into the quiet. Fragments of her day, the frustration of a broken washing machine, the loneliness of passing familiar faces at the grocery store who didn't really see her, the gnawing worry about money, about the future, about whether she was enough, doing enough for Chloe. She never spoke of him, of David. The name felt like a shard of glass lodged in her throat, but Tara, in her quiet vigil, seemed to sense the shape of that absence, the raw edges of the wound Sarah kept carefully bandaged. One night, particularly bleak, Sarah had sat staring blankly at the wall, tears she hadn't even felt starting to fall. She hadn't made a sound, but Tara, who had been dozing beside her, had lifted her head. She didn't meow, didn't nudge. She simply stretched one front paw slowly, deliberately, and placed it on Sarah's thigh, just the soft pad of her paw, resting there, a tiny point of contact, a silent anchor in the storm of Sarah's silent grief. Sarah had placed her hand over Tara's paw, feeling the small bones beneath the fur, the steady warmth. They stayed like that for a long time, until Sarah's breathing evened out, and the crushing weight, just for that moment, felt a fraction lighter. It was the first time Sarah truly felt Tara's presence as something more than just a cat sharing their space. It felt like companionship, a silent understanding between two survivors. Tara's personality was unfolding, not in grand gestures, but in 1,000 small cat-like details. Her morning routine was precise, a stretch that arched her entire back, claws kneading the rug, followed by a meticulous face wash starting with one paw, then the other. She had a particular fondness for the crinkly sound of Chloe's toy, balls, batting them with focused intensity under the sofa, then sitting patiently, waiting for Chloe to retrieve them. She was cautious, her movements deliberate, especially near the front door. Sudden noises, a car backfiring in the distance, would flatten her ears and send her slinking low to the ground, seeking the shadow under the coffee table. That faint white scar above her eye, Sarah wondered about it more and more. What encounter had left its mark? It spoke of a life before their porch, a life of vigilance, perhaps hardship. It made her watchfulness over Chloe feel less like a quirk and more like hard-earned instinct. Sensory details anchored Sarah in this new, fragile reality. The smell of damp earth and fallen leaves drifting through the slightly open kitchen window, the smooth, cool surface of the linoleum under her bare feet, the feel of Tara's fur when she did occasionally grace Sarah's lap, thick, slightly coarse guard hairs over a dense, soft undercoat, warm and alive. The sound of Tara's purr, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through Sarah's legs when the cat was truly relaxed. A sound like a tiny, contented engine. The softer, almost inaudible purr she reserved for Chloe. More like a hum, when the little girl lay on the floor beside her, tracing the stripes on her side. The rhythmic rise and fall of Tara's breathing as she slept. A steady counterpoint to the frantic whirl of Sarah's own thoughts. Sarah began to see Tara not just as Chloe's guardian, but as a mirror, a reflection of her own protectiveness, her own fears, her own quiet resilience. Tara's careful boundaries mirrored Sarah's own emotional walls, built brick by brick after David left. Her watchfulness echoed Sarah's constant low-grade anxiety about keeping Chloe safe in this unfamiliar place. Her moments of unexpected affection, like the paw on the thigh, were tiny beacons, reminding Sarah that connection, however quiet, was still possible. One crisp Saturday morning, the first real bite of autumn in the air, Sarah decided to tackle the last few unpacked boxes cluttering the small hallway. Chloe was playing in her room, the sound of plastic blocks tumbling a cheerful background noise. Sarah knelt, slicing tape with a kitchen knife, the dusty smell of cardboard filling her nostrils. She pulled out old photo albums. Winter, coats, a tangle of mismatched mugs. Then, a smaller box, marked simply MISC in David's messy handwriting. Sarah hesitated. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the flaps. Inside, nestled among old chargers and a broken desk lamp, was a framed photo. Her breath hitched. It was from a beach trip, years ago. Chloe, maybe 2, chubby legs planted in the sand, beaming up at the camera. David stood behind her, his hands on her tiny shoulders, smiling. A real smile. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the ghost of the man she thought she'd known, the ghost of the family she thought they were building. The ache, sharp and fresh, stole her breath. She didn't hear Tara approach. She only felt the gentle pressure against her leg. Sarah looked down. Tara was there, sitting upright beside her, her body pressed firmly against Sarah's calf. But it was her eyes that held Sarah captive. Amber, deep, unblinking. They weren't looking at the photo. They were looking directly at Sarah's face, into her eyes, with an intensity, a knowing that felt almost human. Tara didn't purr, didn't rub. She just sat, pressed close, her gaze unwavering. It wasn't pity. It was solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of the pain Sarah held in her hands, as if the cat understood the weight of that image, the fracture it represented. Tara held Sarah's gaze, steady, anchoring her in the present, in the scent of dust and cardboard, in the sound of Chloe's blocks tumbling in the next room. Slowly, the tightness in Sarah's chest eased. She carefully placed the photo frame back in the box, face down. She took a deep, shuddering breath. And Tara, having delivered her silent message, stood, stretched languidly, and padded towards Chloe's room, resuming her post just inside the doorway, watching the little girl build her tower. Leaving Sarah alone, but somehow, profoundly less so. That simple act, a cat choosing to press close and see her in a moment of breaking, was a quiet surprise that shifted something deep within Sarah. The walls, just a little, felt less necessary. The connection, just a little, felt more real. The crisp bite of autumn deepened, painting Millville in fiery reds and burnished golds. Mornings arrived wrapped in thick silver fog that clung to the streets like damp cotton wool, burning off slowly to reveal skies of a clear, hard blue. Sarah found a fragile rhythm. The sharp pang of the beach photo faded, tucked away with the box marked Miss. Not forgotten, but somehow less jagged. Tara's silent vigil beside her that day felt like a turning point. The cat still orbited Chloe with the quiet intensity of a tiny, furry moon, but she began weaving herself more deliberately into Sarah's orbit too. She'd curl on the corner of Sarah's desk while she paid bills online, a warm, purring paperweight. She'd greet her at the door, not with exuberant meows, but with a slow blink, a deliberate rub against her ankle. A silent, "You're home." Chloe thrived in the cooler weather, her cheeks rosy, her laughter echoing in the small backyard as she chased fallen leaves. Tara was her constant shadow, a patient participant in elaborate tea parties held on the slightly damp grass, enduring the placement of a tiny plastic cup beside her paw. Sarah watched them from the kitchen window, a mug warming her hands, the knot of loneliness loosening, just a little. The house began to feel less like borrowed space, more like theirs. The scent of cinnamon toast, Chloe's crayon drawings taped haphazardly to the fridge, the faint, comforting musk of Tara's fur on the old armchair. These were the smells of home now. Then, the scratching started. It wasn't constant. Not at first. It began subtly, almost beneath notice. Sarah would be reading on the sofa, the house quiet except for the ticking clock and Chloe's soft breathing from her room. Then, a faint, rhythmic scritch, scritch, scritch. Like claws lightly dragging across coarse fabric. She'd look up. Tara would be sitting perfectly still, often near the front door, or beside the large curtained window in the living room that looked onto the quiet street. Her amber eyes would be fixed, not on Sarah, but seemingly on nothing, or everything. Her body utterly relaxed, except for one front paw. The paw would move, slowly, deliberately, claws extending, retracting, dragging almost imperceptibly against the rug or the baseboard. Scritch, scritch, pause, scritch. Sarah dismissed it. Cat thing. Maybe she's dreaming. Maybe she's just stretching her claws. But the location, always near points of entry, and the focused stillness of the rest of her body felt unsettlingly deliberate. It wasn't the frantic scratching of a cat wanting out. It was watchful, almost ritualistic, like Tara was tracing an invisible line. One chilly Tuesday evening, Sarah put Chloe to bed early, the little girl worn out from preschool and leaf collecting. The house settled into its nighttime quiet. Sarah was washing dishes, the warm, water and soapy suds a mundane comfort. The streetlight outside cast long, distorted shadows through the living room window. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Louder tonight, more insistent. Sarah turned off the tap, listening. The sound came from the front door. She dried her hands, padding quietly into the living room. Tara sat directly before the door, not facing it, but sitting perpendicular, her body a sleek line parallel to the threshold. Her head was turned, her gaze fixed on the wooden panel, unblinking. Her right paw, claws fully extended, dragged slowly, rhythmically, across the worn welcome mat. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was unnerving in the silence. It wasn't random. It was focused, intent, as if she was marking something, or listening for something through the door. "Tara?" Sarah whispered. The cat didn't startle, didn't turn. Her ear flicked, a tiny acknowledgement. But the scratching continued. Her gaze remained locked on the door. Sarah felt a prickle climb her spine, cold and unwelcome. It was just a cat scratching a mat. So why did it feel like a warning? Why did the familiar shadows in the corners of the room suddenly seem deeper, less friendly? She remembered the scar above Tara's eye, the stillness that wasn't sleep, the way she'd positioned herself between Chloe and the world since day one. What did Tara know, or sense, that Sarah couldn't? Every time someone subscribes, it's like another little light turns on in this peaceful corner of YouTube. If this story touched you tonight, please stay with me. I'd love to share more soft, sleepy cat tales with you. The scratching became a nightly occurrence, sometimes at the door, sometimes at the living room window, always in that eerie stillness, Tara seemingly in a trance, her body relaxed, but her claw tracing that same deliberate line. Sarah tried to rationalize it. Maybe she smelled mice in the walls, though Sarah heard nothing. Maybe she heard the neighbor's cat outside? But Tara never reacted to other cats with anything more than mild curiosity. The explanations felt thin, brittle. The scratching felt like a language Sarah didn't understand, a silent alarm only Tara could hear. Conflict began to stir, low and internal. Sarah's carefully cultivated sense of fragile peace started to fray. The scratching wasn't just a sound. It was a physical manifestation of the low-grade anxiety she'd carried since the move, since David. Tara's watchfulness amplified her own. She found herself checking the locks twice, then 3 times before bed. She'd pause, listening intently, when taking the trash out at night, the darkness beyond the porch light feeling suddenly vast and watchful. Was she being paranoid, letting a cat's quirky behavior spook her? Or was Tara's hard-earned street instinct, etched in that white scar, trying to tell her something? The fear felt irrational, yet undeniable. It whispered, "You're not safe enough. Chloe's not safe enough." Tara responded to Sarah's rising tension not with distance, but with a subtle shift in her own behavior. She became more present, more tactile. When Sarah sat tense on the sofa, Tara wouldn't just sit beside her. She'd press her entire flank firmly against Sarah's leg, a solid, warm weight. Her purr, usually reserved for deep relaxation, would rumble out, low and constant, a sonic balm against Sarah's jangling nerves. It felt deliberate, comforting, protective. One afternoon, Sarah was trying to wrestle a heavy box of winter clothes down from a high shelf in the hall closet. She grunted, straining. Tara appeared silently. She didn't meow, didn't weave between her legs, a tripping hazard she seemed to instinctively avoid. Instead, she sat directly in front of Sarah, looking up, and gave a single, sharp, high-pitched mew. It wasn't plaintive. It was commanding. "Pay attention. Be careful." Sarah paused, startled, then carefully lowered the box. Tara watched until it was safely on the floor, then gave a slow blink and walked away. But the scratching persisted, and with it, a new element. The dog. It belonged to the Johnsons, 3 houses down, a large, muscular pit bull mix named Duke. Sarah had seen him a few times, always leashed, always seemingly calm. Mr. Johnson, a gruff but friendly retiree, walked him faithfully every morning and evening. Duke would lumber along, sniffing fire hydrants, tail wagging slowly. He'd never shown any aggression, never even barked at Tara, who usually watched his passage from the safety of the windowsill with detached interest. Sarah had never felt uneasy around him, until one crisp Saturday morning. Sarah was raking, leaves in the small front yard, the air smelling of damp earth and decay. Chloe, bundled in a bright red jacket, was chasing a particularly vibrant maple leaf swirling near the sidewalk. Tara sat on the porch step, her usual watchful post, eyes tracking Chloe's every skip and giggle. Mr. Johnson rounded the corner, with Duke on his sturdy leash. Everything seemed normal. Duke padded along, head down, sniffing the grass verge. Chloe, engrossed in her leaf, danced backwards right towards the edge of their property line towards Duke's path. Sarah saw it happen in slow motion. Duke's head snapped up, his body stiffened. His ears, usually relaxed, pinned back flat against his skull. A low, guttural rumble started deep in his chest, a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. It wasn't a playful growl, it was primal, threatening. His focus narrowed, laser-sharp, onto the small, moving figure in the red jacket. Chloe, sensing the sudden shift in the air, stopped dancing. She turned, her small face registering confusion, then a flicker of fear as she saw the large dog, rigid and rumbling, looking directly at her. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. "Chloe!" she called out, her voice tight with panic. She dropped the rake, starting forward, but Tara moved first. A blur of tabby fur launched from the porch step, not towards Chloe, but towards the perceived threat. Tara didn't yowl, didn't hiss. She landed silently on the grass, a few feet directly between Chloe and the advancing dog. She didn't crouch defensively. She stood tall. Her back, arched impossibly high, fur standing on end, making her look twice her size. Her tail was a thick, bristling bottle brush held rigid. And her face, Sarah would never forget the transformation. Gone was the quiet watchfulness. Tara's lips were drawn back in a silent, terrifying snarl, revealing sharp, needle-like teeth. Her amber eyes, usually deep pools, were wide, blazing, utterly feral. Fixed unblinkingly on Duke, it was a stance of pure, unadulterated aggression, a challenge, a declaration. "This child is mine, come no closer," Mr. Johnson gasped, jerking hard on Duke's leash. "Whoa! Duke! Easy, boy!" Duke, startled by the sudden, silent fury erupting before him, hesitated. The low rumble stuttered, died. He took a half-step back, his body language shifting from predatory focus to wary confusion. His tail dropped slightly. Sarah reached, Chloe in 2 strides, scooping her up, pressing the trembling child against her chest. She stared at Tara. The cat hadn't moved a muscle, still tall, still bristling, still snarling silently at the dog, a tiny, ferocious statue planted firmly in the grass. Mr. Johnson, flustered and apologetic, quickly pulled Duke away, muttering about squirrels or something setting him off. As the man and dog retreated down the street, Tara slowly, very slowly, lowered her arched back. The fur on her spine and tail smoothed down. She turned her head, just slightly, her blazing eyes meeting Sarah's for a fraction of a second. There was no triumph there, no relaxation, only a fierce, unwavering intensity. Then, without a sound, she turned and walked back towards the porch, leaping lightly onto the step. She sat, facing the street where Duke had vanished, her body relaxed once more, but her gaze watchful, always watchful. Sarah stood, frozen, holding Chloe, her own legs trembling. The crisp autumn air felt suddenly thin, insubstantial. The peaceful morning shattered. Tara's silent, explosive defense, her transformation from quiet guardian to terrifying protector, wasn't just a reaction. It felt like a confirmation. The scratching, the watchfulness. It wasn't paranoia. Tara knew. She sensed things Sarah couldn't. And her response to the dog, a dog that had never acted that way before, wasn't random. It was instinct honed by a past Sarah could only guess at. A past marked by that white scar. The tension wasn't just rising, it had solidified into a chilling certainty. Danger wasn't an abstract fear. It was real. It walked on four legs down their street, and Tara, their quiet Tabby, was standing guard on the front lines. The question wasn't if something would happen, but when, and how much worse it could be. The fragile piece of Millville, of their little home, lay fractured on the dew-damp grass. The memory of Tara's silent snarl, the bristling fury aimed at Duke, hung heavy in the Millville house like wood smoke after a fire. It didn't dissipate. It seeped into the cracks of their fragile peace. Sarah's nerves felt permanently frayed. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of wind in the bare branches outside the living room window, every distant bark sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. The world outside their door no longer felt benign. It felt watchful, predatory. Tara's nightly scratching ritual at the door or window became a grim soundtrack to Sarah's mounting anxiety. Scritch, scritch, scritch. No longer just a quirk. It felt like a countdown. Chloe, blessedly, seemed to bounce back quickly from the encounter. To her, Tara was simply her brave kitty. She'd recount the story with wide eyes and dramatic gestures. And Tara went big, like a lion. And the doggy went, whoa! But Sarah saw the subtle shifts. Chloe stuck closer to the house when playing outside. She'd pause, glancing towards the street, before chasing a ball too far. The innocence had been pricked. Tara's vigilance intensified. She rarely left Chloe's side outdoors now. If Chloe sat on the porch steps, drawing with chalk, Tara sat beside her, facing the street, her body a small, tense barrier. Indoors, she shadowed her from room to room, her amber eyes rarely leaving the child. The quiet watchfulness had hardened into something more, a hyper-alertness that mirrored Sarah's own thrumming fear. The scratching continued, night after night. Sometimes Sarah would snap, "Tara, stop!" The cat would pause, look at her, with those unreadable eyes, and moments later, the soft, insistent scritch, scritch, would resume. It was maddening. It felt like Tara was trying to claw through an invisible barrier, or warn of one Sarah couldn't see. The rational part of her brain whispered, "It's just a cat, it's stress, projecting." But the primal part, the mother part, screamed, "Listen to her!" The tension coiled tighter, a spring wound past its limit. It colored everything. Sarah snapped at Chloe over spilled milk. She lay awake long into the night, listening, straining to hear anything beyond Tara's scratching and the pounding of her own heart. She avoided Mr. Johnson, crossing the street if she saw him walking Duke, though Duke always seemed calm again, placid even. But Sarah couldn't forget the transformation, the low rumble, the pinned ears, the focus on her child. And Tara hadn't forgotten. She'd watched Duke pass from the window, her body utterly still, her tail giving a single sharp twitch at the tip. A silent verdict. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. November had stripped the trees bare. A cold, damp wind whipped dead leaves into miniature cyclones along the sidewalks. The sky was a flat, oppressive gray, promising rain that hadn't yet fallen. Sarah was wrestling with a bulky lock on the backyard gate, trying to secure it properly. Chloe, bundled in her puffy blue coat and striped hat, played nearby, pushing a toy stroller along the narrow strip of grass between their house and the neighbor's tall wooden fence. The gate lock was rusted, stubborn. Sarah grunted, frustration mounting. "Just a sec, sweet pea," she called over her shoulder, focusing on the frozen mechanism. Tara sat nearby, on the back porch step, her usual post. Sarah registered the cat's posture shift, the familiar alert stillness settling over her. But the lock consumed. Her attention, then, chaos. A blur of motion erupted from the side of the neighbor's house. Duke, unseen, unleashed, a silent muscular missile hurtling across the short distance, separating the properties. He wasn't rumbling. He wasn't barking. He moved with terrifying silence and speed, his powerful body low to the ground, his focus terrifyingly absolute. He wasn't running towards Chloe. He was running at her, straight at the small figure pushing the stroller, utterly oblivious. Sarah's head snapped up. Time fractured. She saw Duke, jaws already gaping, eyes fixed. She saw Chloe, turning, her small face registering not fear yet, but confusion at the sudden movement. She saw the sheer impossibility of the distance closing in less than a heartbeat. Her own body felt frozen, leaden. A scream tore from her throat, raw, primal. "Chloe!" But Tara was already airborne. She didn't run across the ground. She launched from the porch step, a brown and gray streak propelled by pure, explosive fury. She didn't aim for Chloe. She aimed directly for the trajectory of the dog, intercepting him just feet before he reached the child. Sarah's scream choked off as Tara collided with Duke's massive head in midair. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're listening alone tonight, know I made this story for you. Subscribe if you want more comfort like this. It wasn't a graceful impact. It was brutal. A small, dense fury meeting raw, charging power. Tara latched on, not with claws raking, but with her entire body. A living, spitting shield. Her claws sank deep into Duke's muzzle, her teeth, those needle-sharp teeth Sarah had glimpsed during the snarl, clamped onto his ear. A sound erupted from Tara that Sarah had never heard, a guttural, demonic shriek of pure rage and defiance that ripped through the cold air. It was the sound of a mother defending her young, amplified to an almost impossible intensity. Duke, shocked, enraged, blinded by the sudden, painful assault on his face, stumbled. His charge faltered. His powerful head whipped sideways, trying to dislodge the shrieking, clawing fury attached to it. Tara held on, a relentless furry burr, her body twisting, her claws digging deeper, her teeth locked. She was buying seconds, precious, impossible seconds. Sarah's paralysis shattered. She lunged forward, not thinking, only acting. She reached Chloe, who was now screaming in terror, scooped her up with one arm, and kept moving. She didn't run towards the house. She ran past the thrashing dog and cat, towards the open gate she'd been wrestling with, yanking it wider, stumbling into the relative safety of the backyard, slamming it shut behind her with a force that rattled the hinges. She leaned against it, gasping, clutching Chloe, who was sobbing hysterically into her neck, her little body shaking violently. The horrific sounds continued on the other side of the fence. Duke's deep, furious barks, snarls, the sickening thud of bodies, and Tara's shrieks, rising, then suddenly cut off with a sharp, pained yowl. Then silence. A terrible, heavy silence broken only by Chloe's terrified sobs and Sarah's ragged breathing. "Tara," Sarah whispered, the name catching in her throat like broken glass. She couldn't see. The tall fence blocked the view. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. Was Tara? Had Duke? She fumbled for the latch on the gate, her hands trembling so violently she could barely grip it. She had to know. She had to help. Chloe clung to her, screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, no!" But Sarah couldn't stop. She shoved the gate open a crack, just enough to peer through, dreading what she might see. The scene was frozen. Duke stood panting heavily, his muzzle bleeding from multiple deep scratches, his ear torn. He looked dazed, confused, the aggression momentarily replaced. by shock and pain, and a few feet away, Tara. She lay on her side on the cold, damp grass, motionless. For one heart-stopping second, Sarah thought the worst. Then, a tiny movement, a shuddering breath. Tara lifted her head, slowly, painfully. Her fur was matted, dirty. Blood, bright red, bloomed vividly against the gray fur on her flank. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. But her eyes, her amber eyes, found Sarah's through the crack in the gate. They weren't glazed, they weren't defeated. They burned with a fierce, exhausted triumph. She'd done it. She'd stopped him. She'd bought the time. Then, slowly, agonizingly, Tara pushed herself up, not onto her feet, onto her belly. She began to crawl, not towards the gate, not towards Sarah. She crawled, dragging her injured body, inch by painful inch, towards Chloe, towards the child she'd just saved, who was still whimpering in Sarah's arms. Tara reached the spot just inside the gate, directly below where Chloe's dangling foot trembled. She stopped, lifted her head again, her gaze fixed on Chloe's tear-streaked face. She let out a sound, not a meow, not a purr, but a soft, broken, questioning marrow, as if to say, "Are you safe? Are you whole?" The dam inside Sarah broke. Sobs racked her body, great heaving gasps of terror, relief, guilt, and overwhelming awestruck gratitude. She sank to her knees on the wet grass, still clutching Chloe, her free hand reaching out, trembling, towards the small, battered hero who lay bleeding at her feet. Tara, their quiet Tabby, their watchful guardian, had hurled herself into the jaws of danger without hesitation. She hadn't just protected Chloe. She'd embodied the purest, fiercest essence of love Sarah had ever witnessed. The silent, scratching, the watchfulness, the explosive defense. It all culminated in this moment of raw, bleeding sacrifice. The truth wasn't just revealed, it was etched in blood on the cold November grass. Tara wasn't just a cat. She was their cat, their protector, their family, and Sarah, kneeling in the damp, weeping, understood with shattering clarity that the tiny, scarred creature before her held a piece of her soul and Chloe's safety in her brave, battered paws. The connection wasn't just real, it was forged in fire. And as Tara lifted her head weakly to nuzzle Sarah's trembling fingers, a tiny, raspy purr vibrating through her injured body, Sarah saw the reflection of her own fierce, protective love mirrored back, amplified 1,000 times, in the depths of those pain-glazed amber eyes. The silence after the attack wasn't peaceful. It was the stunned, ringing quiet after an explosion. Sarah knelt on the cold, damp grass of the backyard, Chloe's trembling body pressed against her chest, the child's terrified sobs muffled against her neck. Her own tears fell freely, hot and unchecked, mingling with the chill November air. Her gaze remained locked on Tara, who lay panting heavily just inside the gate, the vivid red stain spreading slowly on her gray flank. That tiny, questioning marrow hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting them. The world snapped back into horrifying focus with the slam of a neighbor's door, followed by Mr. Johnson's horrified shout. "Duke! No! Good God, what?" Sarah heard his frantic footsteps. On the path, the choked sound he made seeing his dog's bleeding muzzle and torn ear. Duke, the aggression now replaced by shock and pain, whined pitifully, cowering as Mr. Johnson grabbed his collar. Sarah couldn't process the neighbor's apologies, his stammering explanations about a loose board in his fence, his panicked questions about Chloe. Her entire being was focused on the small, broken form before her. Tara tried to lift her head again towards Chloe, a weak, rasping purr vibrating in her chest, but her strength failed. Her head lowered back to the grass, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Tara," Sarah whispered, the name raw. She gently shifted Chloe, still clinging and sobbing, onto her hip. With trembling hands, she carefully scooped Tara up. The cat felt impossibly light, yet the weight of her sacrifice was crushing. Tara didn't struggle. She offered a tiny, pained mewl, her eyes half closed, trusting Sarah completely. The warmth of her small body, the sticky wetness of blood against Sarah's palm, the rapid flutter of her heartbeat. It was a sensory overload that anchored Sarah in the terrifying present. "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." The drive to the emergency vet was a blur of gray streets, and Sarah's frantic prayers muttered under her breath. Chloe, strapped in her car seat, had quieted to hiccuping whimpers, her wide eyes fixed on the bundle of towels in Sarah's lap where Tara lay, her breathing worryingly shallow. Sarah kept one hand on the wheel, the other constantly stroking Tara's head between her ears, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. "You're so brave, so good. We're almost there, sweet girl. Stay with me. Stay with Chloe." Tara's purr, faint and strained, would flicker in response, a fragile lifeline. The sterile, fluorescent-lit chaos of the animal hospital was another assault. Forms were filled with shaking hands. Explanations tumbled out. The unleashed dog, the charge, the cat launching herself, the impact, the blood, the veterinary. Staff moved with efficient calm, their faces grave as they whisked Tara away on a gurney. Sarah was left holding Chloe in a plastic chair that smelled of antiseptic and fear, staring at the swinging doors that had swallowed their hero. The weight of what had happened settled over her like lead. Tara could die. Tara, who had saved Chloe's life without hesitation, could die because of it. The guilt was a physical ache, twisting alongside the terror. Hours crawled by. Chloe eventually fell into an exhausted sleep against Sarah's shoulder. Sarah sat rigid, every nerve screaming, replaying the horrific seconds on a loop. Duke charging, Tara's blur of motion, the sickening thud, the blood. She saw Tara's fierce eyes meeting hers through the gate. The Murrow? The pure, selfless love in that sound. Tears streamed down her face silently. How could she ever repay this? How could she ever feel safe again? The vet finally emerged, her expression weary but not hopeless. Tara had survived surgery, a deep puncture wound in her flank, muscle damage, 2 cracked ribs, severe bruising, and shock. It was serious but not immediately life-threatening. She needed intensive care, pain management, and strict rest. "She's a fighter," the vet said, a note of admiration in her voice. "A real little lion heart." Sarah wept again, this time with a desperate, shuddering relief. Chloe stirred, blinking sleepily. "Tara Owie," she mumbled. "Yes, sweet pea." Sarah choked out, holding her tighter. "But the doctors are making her better." Bringing Tara home 2 days later was a solemn affair. The cat was heavily bandaged, shaved patches revealing angry bruising and stitches. She moved stiffly, painfully, confined to a large crate in the living room for strict rest. The vibrant, watchful creature was reduced to a quiet, wounded patient. Chloe, wide-eyed and gentle, would sit beside the crate for hours, talking softly, pushing tiny bits of cooked chicken through the bars with careful fingers. "Brave kitty," she'd whisper. "Get better, Tara." Tara would blink slowly, her purr, though weak, a constant reassuring rumble when Chloe was near. Sarah's life became a rhythm centered around care. Medications administered with practiced gentleness. Bandage changes requiring steady hands and soothing murmurs. Soft food offered in small portions, keeping Chloe calm and understanding Tara's need for quiet. The constant vigilance she'd felt before the attack was now directed inward, towards healing. Yet, Something profound had shifted. The fear that had coiled so tightly within her hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer the free-floating anxiety of the unknown. It was a fierce, focused determination born of gratitude. Tara had shown her what true protection looked like. Now, it was Sarah's turn to be the unwavering guardian. She noticed the changes in Tara, subtle but significant. The obsessive scratching at the doors and windows stopped completely. It was as if the attack had been the threat she'd been sensing, the danger she'd been marking territory against. With Duke gone, Mr. Johnson, devastated and remorseful, had made the difficult decision to rehome him with a specialized trainer far away. The silent alarm was silenced. Tara's watchfulness over Chloe remained, but it had softened. It was less hypervigilant, more deeply bonded. When Chloe played on the floor near her crate, Tara's eyes would follow her, but her body stayed relaxed, the purr deepening. It was the watchfulness of love, not fear. Sarah's own routines felt different, imbued with a new layer of meaning. Preparing Tara's special meals wasn't a chore, it was an act of devotion. Cleaning her crate wasn't just hygiene, it was tending to sacred space. The quiet evenings, once filled with lonely silence or anxious thoughts, were now shared with Tara's recovering presence. Sarah would sit beside the crate, reading aloud, sometimes just talking softly about her day, about Chloe. Tara would listen, her eyes half closed, her purr a soft counterpoint to Sarah's voice. The connection forged in terror was now being annealed in quiet care. The world outside hadn't magically become safe. Sarah still double-checked locks. She was hyper-aware of dogs on walks, keeping Chloe close. But the paralyzing dread was gone, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at the scar above Tara's eye, now joined by the shaved patch and stitches on her flank, not as a mark of a mysterious, harsh past, but as a testament to survival, to resilience, and now to breathtaking courage. It was a history they shared now, a story written in fur and blood and love. One crisp December afternoon, the vet finally approved Tara's release from the crate for short, supervised periods. Chloe clapped her hands in delight. Sarah held her breath as she carefully lifted Tara out, supporting her hindquarters. Tara stood unsteadily on the rug, taking a few tentative, stiff steps. Then, slowly, deliberately, she walked across the living room. Not to her favorite sun patch, not to the window. She walked directly to where Chloe sat, coloring at the coffee table. Tara stopped beside her, looked up at the little girl. Then, with immense care, she leaned her entire body weight against Chloe's leg and began to purr. A deep, resonant, contented rumble that filled the room. Chloe beamed, dropping her crayon to gently stroke Tara's head. "Hi, brave kitty." Sarah watched them, tears pricking her eyes again, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This simple act, Tara choosing closeness, seeking comfort from Chloe, was the final piece settling into place. The protector was allowing herself to be comforted. The circle of trust, tested in fire, was complete. Life moved forward, irrevocably changed. The fear had been real. The danger had been real. But so was the love. So was the courage. And so was this quiet, hard-won peace that now filled their little house. It wasn't the fragile peace of before, easily shattered by a scratching sound. It was a peace forged in the aftermath, a peace built on the unshakable knowledge of what they would do for each other. Sarah looked out the kitchen window at the bare branches silhouetted against the winter sky, remembering the gray October rain, the loneliness, the question, did I make a terrible mistake? Now listening to Tara's purr and Chloe's soft chatter, she knew the answer. Bringing them here, to this house, to this quiet Tabby who found them, hadn't been a mistake. It had been the beginning of everything. The scar above Tara's eye, the healing wound on her flank, they weren't just marks of the past. They were the map of how they found their way home to each other. The corner they had carved out in Millville wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a sanctuary, guarded by a small, striped lion heart. Winter deepened its hold on Millville, frosting the windows each morning with delicate, crystalline patterns. The world outside moved in hushed tones, snow-muffling footsteps, bare branches, creaking under the weight of ice. Inside the little house, warmth pooled in golden patches on the hardwood floors, and the scent of cinnamon and wool blankets lingered in the air. Tara's recovery was slow but steady. The bandages had come off, revealing jagged scars beneath. Her fur, thin, raised lines that Chloe would trace with feather-light fingers, whispering, "Brave kitty." Sarah watched them now from the kitchen doorway, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Chloe sat cross-legged on the rug, engrossed in a picture book, her brow furrowed in concentration. Tara lay beside her, no longer stiff with pain, but still cautious, her body curled just close enough that her tail brushed Chloe's knee. The cat's amber eyes were half-lidded, her breathing deep and even, but Sarah knew better than to mistake her stillness for sleep. Tara never truly slept when Chloe was awake. Not like before. Even now her ears twitched at every rustle of paper, every shift of Chloe's weight. It had been 6 weeks since the attack, 6 weeks of careful healing, of hushed conversations with Mr. Johnson, who still stopped by weekly with apologies and treats for Tara, of nights where Sarah would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom sound of snarling ringing in her ears. But time had softened the edges of the terror. The nightmares came less often. The tightness in Sarah's chest when she passed the backyard gate had eased, and Tara had changed in ways Sarah was only beginning to understand. The cat, no longer scratched at the doors at night. She no longer positioned herself like a sentinel between Chloe and the world. Instead, she had developed a new ritual, one Sarah hadn't noticed at first. So quiet and unassuming was it. Every evening, as Sarah tucked Chloe into bed, Tara would wait until the last story was read, the last kiss pressed to Chloe's forehead. Then, as Sarah turned to leave, Tara would leap lightly onto the bed, circle once, and settle at Chloe's feet. Not curled up, not asleep. Sitting upright, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the door. A silent, steadfast guardian through the night. But it wasn't just Chloe she watched over. One evening, Sarah sat on the couch, the glow of the Christmas tree casting fractured shadows across the room. The house was quiet, the only sounds the occasional pop of sap in the fireplace and the soft hum of the refrigerator. She held an envelope in her hands, one she'd found tucked in the back of a drawer while searching for spare batteries. David's handwriting stared back at her, the ink slightly smudged from age. A letter she'd never opened, a relic from a life she'd packed away like winter coats in spring. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over. She hadn't thought about him in months, hadn't allowed herself to. But tonight, with the snow falling outside and the house wrapped in stillness, the past pressed in like an unwelcome guest. She didn't hear Tara approach, only felt the gentle weight of the cat landing beside her on the couch, the warmth of her body pressing against Sarah's thigh. Tara didn't meow, didn't nudge the letter. She simply sat there, close but not crowding, her presence a quiet anchor. Sarah exhaled. "I don't know if I want to read it," she admitted aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Tara blinked slowly, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. Then, deliberately, she stretched out one paw and placed it on Sarah's wrist, not to stop her, just to remind her, "You're not alone." Sarah stared at the small, scarred paw resting against her skin, the same paw that had clawed at the door night after night, warning of danger. the same paw that had raked bloody lines into Duke's muzzle to protect Chloe. And now here it was, gentle, steady, offering silent strength. She opened the letter. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. Just a few lines, written in haste, the words blunt and unadorned. Sarah, I know you won't believe me, but I never wanted this. I'm not good at fixing things. Never was. You and Chloe deserve better than that. You deserve someone who stays. I hope you find him. The words should have hurt. They should have ripped open the half-healed wound of abandonment. But instead, Sarah felt nothing. No anger, no grief. Just a quiet acknowledgement, like recognizing an old coat that no longer fit. She let the letter fall onto the coffee table. Tara, sensing the shift, leaned more heavily against her, her purr a soft, steady vibration. And then, Sarah laughed. A small, breathless sound. Because suddenly, she understood. The letter wasn't the revelation. This was. This moment. This quiet companionship. This small, scarred creature who had fought for them, bled for them, and now sat beside her, offering wordless comfort. Tara had been the one who stayed. The realization settled over her like snowfall, soft, inevitable. She stroked Tara's head, her fingers tracing the old scar above the cat's eye. "You've been trying to tell me all along, haven't you?" she murmured. Tara just purred louder, bumping her head against Sarah's hand. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Her oldest friend, Lisa, who had begged her not to move so far away. The call connected after 2 rings. "Sarah?" Lisa's voice was equal parts surprise and concern. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she expected. I think we're ready for visitors." A pause, then warmth. "Yeah? When? How? About Christmas?" She could almost hear Lisa's smile through the phone. "I'll bring the cookies." When Sarah hung up, she found Tara sitting in a patch of sunlight on the kitchen floor, watching her with those knowing amber eyes. "You'll like Lisa," Sarah told her. "She's a cat person." Tara blinked, slow and deliberate, as if to say, "We'll see?" And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt something unclench inside her. Not just relief, not just peace, but the quiet, unshakable certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. That night, as she tucked Chloe into bed, she lingered a little longer than usual, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her forehead. "Mommy?" Chloe murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweet pea." "Tara's staying, right?" Sarah glanced at the foot of the bed where Tara had already taken up her nightly vigil. The cat's eyes gleamed in the dim light, unwavering. "Yeah, baby," Sarah whispered, pressing a kiss to Chloe's temple. "She's staying." And as she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was true. The first snow of December fell on a Sunday morning, soft, silent, transforming Millville into a hushed world of white. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes spiral down, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Behind her, Chloe's giggles filled the room as she played on the rug with Tara, dangling a piece of yarn just out of reach. The cat batted at it with careful precision, her movements no longer stiff with healing but still deliberate, mindful of the scars beneath her fur. It had been 2 months since the attack, 2 months of slow, quiet rebuilding. The nightmares had faded. The fear that once coiled in Sarah's chest had loosened its grip, replaced by something steadier, a gratitude so deep it ached. She watched Tara now, the way the cat paused mid-play, to press her forehead against Chloe's tiny hand, as if to say, "I'm here, you're safe." Some bonds aren't forged in grand gestures. They're built in the quiet moments, the shared silence of a winter morning, the weight of a small body leaning against your leg, the way a scarred tabby cat chooses, again and again, to stay. Sarah had spent so long afraid, of being alone, of not being enough, of the world's sharp edges hurting Chloe. But Tara had shown her something else. That love isn't just about shielding someone from the storm. It's about standing beside them through it, claws and all. She set her coffee down and joined them on the rug, cross-legged beside Chloe. Tara immediately abandoned the yarn and stepped into Sarah's lap, circling once before settling down with a contented sigh. Her purr vibrated against Sarah's thighs. A steady, grounding rhythm. Chloe grinned, reaching out to stroke Tara's back. "She loves you, Mommy." Sarah's throat tightened. She ran a hand over Tara's fur, fingers brushing the raised line of the largest scar, the one that would never fully fade. "Yeah," she whispered. "I love her too." Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the world in quiet. The backyard gate, the one Sarah had once wrestled with, the one Duke had charged through, stood closed, its latch now reinforced, its wood weathered but solid. A boundary, a line drawn, but not a barricade. Because here's the thing about scars. They're proof. Proof you survived. Proof you fought. Proof something mattered enough to leave a mark. Tara's scars told a story. So did Sarah's. And maybe, Sarah thought as she lifted her face to the window, watching the snowflakes melt against the glass, that was the real gift Tara had given them. Not just protection, not just courage, but the quiet understanding that they were all a little broken, and that was okay. Broken things could still be whole. Chloe leaned against her, warm and solid, her small hand patting Tara's head. "Can we make cookies today?" Sarah smiled. "Yeah, baby, we can make cookies." Tara stretched, her claws kneading gently against Sarah's leg, her purr deepening, and in that moment, with the snow falling and the house wrapped in warmth, with Chloe's laughter ringing and Tara's weight a comforting pressure in her lap, Sarah realized something. She wasn't just keeping them safe. She was home. You stayed till the end. Thank you. If this story felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this. Because in a world that's often too loud, too sharp, too fast, we all need a quiet corner where love is simple, where scars mean strength, and where the smallest heroes wear fur. Tara stayed. Will you?